So today we are answering the question, does your higher self actually plan your life before you're born? This is something I see in New Age and mystic communities a lot. So we're going to answer the question, is this possible? Does this actually happen? And not only that, but we're going to be talking about the unconscious in general, because this is very much related to your higher self. And just heads up, I'm going to be reading a quote, some quotes from this article on medium.com called How the Unconscious Mind Plans the Life for Our Conscious Reality, written by Knowledge Collective. So if you like some of the excerpts that I read from this, make sure you go give Knowledge Collective a follow over on medium.com and show them some support. And you can read the full article there yourself as well. So let's talk about this. We're going to be talking about the higher self. And so when we're answering the question, does the higher self actually plan your life before you're born? Well, we have to understand what the higher self is. A lot of people don't really have a good concept of what the higher self is. So what the higher self is, it's you in your totality. You are the higher self. So the higher self is all of you. In neogenian terms, it's the zeta. The zeta, the soul, the mind, in its totality is the higher self. It's what you are. And we also call this concept the inner star. Especially when we're talking about inner star actualization, we refer to the higher self as the inner star in the neogenian system, but it's you as a zeta. That's what it is. It's you with all the contents of all the different lifetimes that you've had and all the transformations embedded within your mind. It's you as a totality. So that's important to understand. And a lot of people look at the higher self as sort of being like this godlike being that's looking out for you and guiding you. And while the unconscious and the higher self does work in the background, it's not exactly like that. So a good way to understand it is sort of, and this isn't a perfect analogy, but it's a good way to start to grasp it. It's basically like this. Let's say that you put on a virtual reality headset and you enter a virtual reality world. Like you have the headset on, you're playing a virtual reality game, but pretend for some reason, somehow, the virtual reality headset is able to filter all of your memories and all of your experiences so that you forget that you are a body out there wearing a headset and you think that you are the character in the game. And so the only thing that you know is you as the character in the game, the experiences that you're having as the character in the game. So this is kind of like the relationship between the higher self and the ego. In that the character in the game that only has knowledge of itself as the character in the game is like the ego. And the higher self is you in your totality, in that this game has filtered those memories out, but you still exist. You still exist. You still have all your memories. They're just inaccessible to you. You have all those contents. They're just inaccessible to you. But that's what you actually are. That's what you still are. And so that's why Carl Jung said the ego is the servant of the higher self, or the self in miniature. And that makes a lot of sense in terms of this video game analogy. And the character that you're playing the video game is like the servant of you. It's the you that allows you to interact in the video game world. So you are really like a portal for your higher self into this world. And the goal is to remember and integrate. And that's why in inner star actualization, it's about actualizing your inner star, which means allowing more and more of your true self to come through into this reality, meaning accessing aspects of your unconscious and integrating them into consciousness. This would be like in the video game metaphor, accessing parts of your mind that were filtered out and bringing them into consciousness. Again, not exactly like this, but it's a loose metaphor that does a decent job. So that's what inner star actualization in the neogenian system is all about. It's about understanding the different aspects of your unconscious mind and bringing them into consciousness, bringing them into your consciousness field and integrating them into your life in a way where they are operating in a way where it is beneficial to you and your life and your will. And thus you're actualizing the inner star because you are actualizing more and more of your true self. So that's just an important foundation to know and understand what your higher self is. It's you in your totality. It is the zeta. You are the zeta. It's not something apart from you. It's not something different from you. It is you. Your ego self is just a partitioned version of it. So in this article, Knowledge Collective says, did you know that it's believed that a huge percentage of our daily actions are made from our subconscious mind? Things like breathing, blinking, your heartbeat, all these essential functions happen automatically without you having to consciously think about them. And that's true, right? You have these different aspects of your autonomic nervous system, and you don't have to think about your heart beating. You don't have to think about all these processes going on in your body. You don't have to consciously think about them to have them occur. But it says, but beyond just bodily functions, our subconscious mind also seems to be the one pulling the strings in many of our day-to-day decisions and behaviors. And this is also true. And by the way, I use the word unconscious rather than subconscious. You can use them interchangeably. They mean the same thing. Now, sometimes in some theories, they don't mean the same thing. There's consciousness, preconscious, subconscious, and unconscious. And these are just basically deeper levels. Consciousness is what you're able to access, what's in your immediate conscious field. Preconscious is things that aren't in your consciousness, but that you could easily access them if you wanted, like someone's birthday. It's not in your consciousness right now, but you could access it and pull it into consciousness if you want. Subconscious are those aspects of yourself that are buried deep and you have to do very hard introspection to get to. And then the unconscious are even deeper than that and requires, to access that would require like therapy, altered states, very deep reflective work, etc. But to keep these, I don't think it's necessary to partition it like that. I just talk about consciousness and the unconscious. And in general, in psychology, that's how it's done as well. And subconscious and unconscious usually aren't differentiated. They're usually used interchangeably. So when I'm talking about the neogenian system and interstar actualization, I refer to consciousness and the unconscious. Consciousness being all those things which are in your immediate consciousness field, awareness, and the unconscious being the vast aspect of yourself that is below consciousness and has to be accessed in various ways. Every now and then I'll use preconscious, but not often. So that's just to keep that in mind. Whenever they say subconscious here, they're meaning unconscious. It's the aspect of you that's beyond conscious awareness. And so they're essentially saying here that our subconscious or unconscious mind seems to be the one pulling the strings in many of our day-to-day decisions and behaviors. And that's absolutely true. Carl Jung said, until you make the darkness conscious or the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So essentially, a lot of your motivations and actions are driven by unconscious drives, things that you aren't aware of, things that you desire, people that you are attracted to, goals that you want to achieve. You may think that they are being directed by your consciousness, but they are often highly influenced by your unconscious drives. And this is why in interstar actualization, we're all about integrating these aspects so that you aren't driven by unconscious forces, but are making them conscious and are consciously aware and the master of your own mind. So you are pulling into consciousness all these unconscious aspects. But yeah, if you don't do that, it is behind the scenes pulling the strings. The shadow self is built up of all the repressed urges that you have. The mirror self is your inner opposite and contains ideas related to the type of people that you are attracted to, among many other things. And then the power self is the inner fire or inner power that you have, that your potentialities that want to be actualized. And this leads to people that you admire, because you often see your potential reflected in these idols or inspirational individuals. But it's important to integrate all these things because they can lead to a lot of damaging ideas. Like shadow self-repression, has to do with, for example, people who hate gay people may do so because they have the repressed urge to be with members of the same gender themselves. They, in other words, they have a secret desire to be gay. They don't even know about. They don't acknowledge it. But because of that, it's part of their shadow self, and via shadow self projection, it makes them lash out and hate gay people because this eases the psychological discomfort, this clash, because they think, oh, well, clearly I can't be gay. Look how much I hate gay people. Mirror self projection occurs when you haven't integrated the mirror self. And this is a really complicated one. And this can lead to a lot of gender issues where, say, men are suppressing women and women are looking at men as resources to be used. And I'm being very stereotypical right now, but I have to generalize and whatnot. But in essence, it can result in treating the gender that is not your own in a negative way. This is often occurs in mirror self-projection. And then power self-projection occurs, is a very big problem that can lead to things like fascism, where someone sees a leader and they admire that leader and then will do whatever that leader says because they have projected their own power onto that person, and that person then represents every potentiality that they desire, the power that they desire, and so they align themselves with this powerful person. So you can see how these unconscious drives are behind the scenes, and they are pulling the strings in a certain way. They're directing your life, and this is why interstar actualization is super important, to actualize your true self, to make sure that you are in conscious control. And this is all important to understand as we realize what the higher self really is. Because remember, we want to know what these things are. And a lot of the times in New Age and mysticism, a lot of problems arise because people don't know what these things are. They just talk about quantum physics and the higher self and all these ideas that they don't really know too much about often, and kind of just make stuff up. They say they're getting downloads or intuitions, and it's very possible that they are, but they have to be, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's great to have strong intuition. That's one of the strengths of, New Agers and mystics, that they have such powerful intuition. The problem is that they very often don't organize it and filter it and condition it according to logic and reason. You have to go over these intuitions and make sure that they're filtered and organized correctly. So we want to know what the higher self is. The higher self is you in your totality, and it contains all of these aspects of you that are unconscious, as well as your consciousness. Everything that is you is, even the parts you can't access, those are that forms your higher self, your inner star. You is a zeta. So the author says here, Knowledge Collective says, what's the difference between consciousness and unconscious? What is the unconscious? What is our core self? And how could we name it? So I'm going to skip a little bit because we talked about what the higher self is and everything. We already discussed this. So Knowledge Collective says, I believe the higher self is something beyond this 3D reality. Call it a soul, higher self, or the light within. It's the very essence of who we are beneath all the layers of conditioning and beliefs. And that is true. Yes, our higher self is something beyond this, what he calls 3D reality. Or I don't know their gender. They call 3D reality. And you as a soul, as a zeta, are beyond this 3D reality. You are a being of frequency. You exist in the frequency domain, not the domain of space and time. You exist in the frequency domain. Your avatar exists in the space-time domain and allows you to experience the space-time world and interface with it. But yes, that is true. It is the essence of who we are. So it's not something apart from you. It's not something different from you. It is the true you. It is the whole you. So Knowledge Collective says, what if, as some like Dolores Cannon wrote, it is our soul, which is mostly part of our unconscious mind that plans out the blueprint for our entire life before we incarnate. Okay, so this is an idea, and Dolores Cannon put forth this idea. I doubt she was the first one to do it, but I think she popularized it. And, honestly, I don't know much about Dolores Cannon, but some of the ideas I've heard from Dolores Cannon are pretty out there. So I examine everything with logic and reason with that. So it's the idea that your higher self or your soul chooses your life before you incarnate. And this is fairly popular. I've seen a lot of New Agers write about this and talk about this. So the author says, what if every challenge, every synchronicity, every person we meet is all sort of prearranged by our higher self in order to learn and grow in the specific way we need to? So is that what's going on? Is our higher self choosing to everything that occurs in our life pre-planned? Every person we meet, every book we read, every experience we have, is that all pre-planned by our higher consciousness, our higher self? And this also starts to bleed into the idea of like soul contracts as well, where New Agers believe like, oh, you have a soul contract where you're supposed to you've made this contract to do the specific thing and live a certain way or accomplish certain goals and objectives. So here's what we know. When your avatar passes, you as the Zeta are no longer interfacing with this avatar, and so you tune into another domain. Now, this may be your own internal domain, your own frequencies, your own dream world. It might be another CFD, collective frequency domain. It might be the frequency domain itself. It might be all of these things in different modes. You might experience all of these things in different modes. We don't know in what order. We don't know for sure which ones, but these are the different modes that we know our consciousness is not tuned into this world anymore, so it can be tuned into another domain, whether it's your own inner domain, another CFD projection, or the frequency domain itself, the source, etc. You can tune into these different things most likely. So what likely occurs at this point is that you go into what we call the death current, where you are swept along in an unconscious state, and this results in your relocalization. In other words, just like your unconscious in the background controls your life in the physical domain, it's very likely that your unconscious selects how you're going to localize in an unconscious way. Now, when I say selects how it's going to localize, I don't mean plans your entire life. I mean like a sperm that seeks the egg, right? The sperm is not planning the entire life of, what will develop. It's just searching for something to interface with. It's likely the unconscious is, in a similar way, moving you towards, and not physically, of course, this is all in the mental domain, to an avatar to be able to interface with. An avatar that's able to support an interface. And depending on your level of development and sophistication, probably leads you to gravitate to more sophisticated avatars, from animal to human, etc. But it's most likely not done in a conscious state. Now, we don't know this for sure, but based on what we know about altered states of consciousness, we know it's very difficult to remain lucid. Like when you go to sleep and dream, you don't know that you're dreaming. You think you're in a dream until you become lucid. Now, it's possible that you could become lucid and make conscious choices if you've optimized yourself as a Zeta high enough. And so I talk about this in one of my books, and this has to do with developing the Zetic analog. And it has to do with fostering and developing the Zetic perspective. I'm not going to get into too much now, but it's speculative. Again, we don't know this for sure, but it may be the case that by developing the Zetic analog, you can start to become conscious in the death current, just like you can become lucid in a dream. It stands to reason that that may be possible. Now, if that is possible, and some minds or souls have reached that level of consciousness, it is possible that they can then consciously select for the avatar that they're going to interface with. Now, this means that they may be able to set the initial conditions for their next life trajectory. Now, what that means is, by setting the initial conditions for the next life trajectory, it's highly unlikely that you are choosing your entire life pattern, which means, like, according to New Age ideas, like it's everything. Every person you're going to meet, every book that you read, every bite of food that you take, all of it is pre-planned and chosen and laid out by you before you're born. This is highly unlikely to be true. Again, is it one of those things we can say for sure no? No, but it's highly unlikely to be true because you would require infinite knowledge of every mind in existence, because this isn't just, this requires the coordination of all reality and all existence to choose, have it such that you're going to plan for every person that you meet and every bite of food that you take and every book that you read and every experience that you have would require massive coordination with all minds in existence to coordinate something at that level of specificity. So the idea here is that you can choose. That's highly unlikely, in my opinion. I do not think that is the case. However, I do think that it may be possible for you to choose the initial conditions of your next life trajectory, which means if you're in a conscious state, you may be able to choose the specific avatar or possible family that you're born into. And using your knowledge, you can perhaps predict what may happen. You may realize, oh, if I am born into this specific family, I will face these particular challenges, which will cause me to do X, Y, and Z. Just for example, let me throw this out there. I'm not saying this is true, but let me throw this out there. Let's say before I was born in this particular avatar, I was conscious in the death current, and I said, you know what? I am going to specifically choose to be born into a religious household so that I will have first-hand experience of how damaging religion is, and so that it will spur me on to seek truth and seek knowledge in a passionate way. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but you can see how if a mind is conscious in the death current, they may be able to choose initial conditions such that that occurs. Now, this is not a guarantee because again, this what it's like is like maybe shooting pool. Let's say you're playing pool, or what do they call it? Snooker ball in overseas. Anyway, you're playing pool, and if you're playing pool, you can you put the pool ball down, the cue ball, and you take your stick. I forget. I don't know the name. I don't play pool. I don't know the names. But anyway, you're going to set the initial conditions of what angle you're going to hit the ball, how hard you're going to hit it. And you can think, okay, well, if I hit it at this velocity with this force and this angle, it'll hit that ball over there, which will bounce at that ball over there and make it go in the corner pocket. And depending how good you are at pool will depend on how accurate your prediction is. But it's never going to be 100% perfect. It's based on the initial conditions. Even if you're a perfect pool player, maybe there's a little bump in the pool board pool table that you're not aware of, and you didn't account for that, and it messes your shot up. Same thing, you can think of all different kinds of examples, bowling or basketball, where you're setting the initial conditions. Like you're bowling, you're picking where you're going to throw the ball, what angle to try and get a strike. But there might be something that you didn't account for. Maybe the surface is waxier than you thought it was, or whatever. You're never going to be totally perfect. So it's very likely that being conscious in the death current is like this, where minds can possibly select the initial conditions for their next life trajectory and have some kind of idea of what that may be like. Like I said, perhaps I chose to be in a religious family so that I would incarnate, have the urge to seek truth because of that experience. But what if I got that wrong and I never left Christianity and I was trapped in that forever because maybe there was something I didn't account for. Maybe I was never exposed to philosophical ideas and I thought I would be, or I don't know, something like that. And again, I'm not saying that happened. I'm just using that as a possible, example. So when people are saying that your higher self can choose your entire life down to every person you meet and every minutia, I don't see a good reason to believe that that is true because of the level of coordination that that would take and not being given a rational mechanism onto how that could occur. Now, do we know for sure? No, maybe it's true. We can't rule it out completely, but I have not been given a rational mechanism onto how this could be possible. And the immense amount of coordination that it would take for it to be possible points to the probability that this is not true. So it's likely that for most people, it's an unconscious process where you just gravitate towards a particular avatar based on unconscious drives. If you are able to gain lucidity in the death current, then based on that consciousness that you have, you could possibly select the initial conditions of your next life, such as what family you're born into and, what part of the world or something like that. And the accuracy of what effect that will have will likely be based on the level of knowledge and consciousness that you have as a mind. Just like someone who's really good at pool will be much better than someone who just started yesterday. So someone who has gone through this process and tried different initial conditions and views how it works out will likely be better at choosing initial conditions than a mind that's very new at having consciousness in the death current. And so, because remember, all of this avataric experience that we have is about gaining knowledge and experience. And when our avatar passes, that's probably what a life review is integrating important elements of the life experience that we have that we can then learn from. And so when the avatar passes, we enter the death current. And like I said, at this point in the death current, we don't know precisely what happens with 100% certainty. We know that you will always exist. Your subjectivity is eternal. That's for sure. But what exactly occurs, we can't say with certainty, but what likely occurs is that for most minds, it's an unconscious process. For some minds, it's probably a conscious process where they can choose the initial conditions for their next life trajectory. The more experience they have in doing this, the better they likely are at doing this, but it's never a guaranteed. You're not going to be choosing everything down to the exact people you're going to meet. You're going to be choosing basically, okay, if I start from this position, this is what is likely going to happen because of these specific initial conditions. So the New Age mystic idea that you have chosen every single little tiny, teeny aspect of your life, in my opinion, is highly unlikely and very improbable, but it's likely that some minds can set the initial conditions to guide or kickstart their next life trajectory. So I hope this helped, my friends. I know this is something that's going on a lot in the New Age circles, and it's important to remember that, hey, maybe it's true, but we need to know it rationally and logically. We need to know, hey, if it is, how is it possible? By what rational mechanism is it possible? And how does it account for the massive amount of coordination that will be required to access this? So this is why having everything examined with logic and reason is important, because when people have these intuitions or downloads, they very often may contain kernels of truth. Like someone who has, let's say, the intuition or download that, oh, we choose our next life. That might be based on the intuition that we could choose our next initial conditions. But going so far as to saying, oh, and that means we can choose every single aspect, we have to examine that with logic and reason. See, is that really true? Or are we now going overboard and assigning things that have no basis in reason? We need to examine them logically and rationally. It doesn't mean they're not true, but we have to always examine them logically and rationally and see what is possible, what is probable, and what is improbable and unlikely. And so this is important to understand when it comes to the higher self. The higher self is you. It is what you are. It is you in your totality. And when you gain consciousness, this is part of consciousness, is an aspect of you as your higher self. And the goal is to make the unconscious conscious. So to constantly expand your conscious field and hopefully gain consciousness in the death current. So I hope you enjoyed that, my friends. This was a members only video. Hope you liked it. I release one members only video to the public once a month. Sometimes, I don't know. I think I skipped a couple, but maybe you'll see this, maybe you won't. but I appreciate all you guys who are members. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Thank you for your support. You guys are the best. And I want to give a big shout out to Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Nuselina, Eric, Christopher, Joel, Phillips, Luke, Thomas, Ryan, Antoine, and everyone else. Thank you very much.